I'm 94 years old. It's late while I'm recording this. The refrigerator is humming, and the clock in the hallway sounds louder than it ever used to. Nights stretch longer at this age. There isn't much to interrupt them anymore. The house has been quiet for years. I used to say I loved a peaceful home. I said it proudly. I kept things tidy. I kept my voice measured. I kept disagreements short. I believed calm meant successful. I believed silence meant harmony. I understand now. I misunderstood the difference. When I was younger, our home was small but full. My husband worked long hours. The children's shoes were always by the door. There was noise then, laughter, bickering, doors opening and closing. I remember feeling overwhelmed sometimes. I would press my fingers to my temples and whisper, "Can we please just have some quiet?" I didn't mean anything cruel by it. I was tired, that's all. But I said it often. At dinner, if voices got too loud, I would tighten my expression. If feelings spilled over, I would smooth them down. I had a way of ending conversations without seeming to end them. A look, a sigh, a small change in tone. The room would settle, and I would feel in control again. I thought I was protecting the house from chaos. I didn't see that I was slowly teaching everyone inside it to fold themselves smaller. There was a night, I remember it clearly, when my daughter stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She was 16. She wanted to tell me something important. I could see it in her eyes. But the sink was full of dishes. The television was on. I was tired from the day. She began speaking in circles, hesitating. I interrupted gently and told her we would talk tomorrow when things were calmer. I smiled at her. I meant to reassure her. Tomorrow never came. She stopped trying after that. I didn't notice it immediately. Children grow quiet in their own ways. I assumed it was part of becoming independent. Years passed and I became known as the steady one, the composed one, the woman who never raised her voice. People admired that. What they didn't see was how uncomfortable I felt with strong emotion. Anger made my chest tighten. Tears made me uneasy. Even joy that was too loud felt like something that needed to be managed. So I managed it. When my husband came home frustrated from work, I would respond with calm logic instead of listening to his tone. When he tried to talk about feeling uncertain or disappointed, I redirected the conversation toward practical matters. I told myself I was keeping us grounded. He began speaking less. At first it felt easier. No tension, no sharp words, just smooth evenings and polite conversation. We became efficient together. Bills paid, groceries bought, holidays planned neatly. But something else faded in the process. I remember sitting across from him one Sunday afternoon. The children had moved out by then. The house was clean. The air was still. He looked at me for a long moment as if he wanted to say something. Instead, he just nodded once and picked up his newspaper. There are moments you don't recognize as turning points until decades later. That was one of them. I had spent so many years lowering the volume of every feeling that eventually there were no feelings left to lower, just quiet. I thought I was building peace. I was building distance. When my son stopped calling as often, I told myself he was busy. When holidays became shorter visits, I told myself young families have their own rhythms. I didn't question why conversations felt surface level, why no one lingered at the table the way they once had. The truth is, they had learned from me. They learned that deep emotion made me uncomfortable. They learned that conflict would be smoothed over rather than explored. They learned that it was easier to keep things light than to risk being told, softly, that we would talk another time. I can still see my daughter's face the last time she tried to open up about her marriage. She sat on this very couch. Her voice trembled in the same way it had when she was 16. I listened politely. I offered careful, reasonable words. I avoided taking sides. I avoided intensity. She nodded, thanked me, and changed the subject. She never brought it up again. I wasn't cold. I wasn't unloving. I attended school plays. I packed lunches. I stayed faithful. I did what was expected of me. But love isn't only in the duties. It is also in sitting inside discomfort with someone. I didn't know that then. I know it now at 94, in a house that barely echoes anymore. After he was gone, I returned to this house and felt something I had never allowed before. Not just grief, emptiness that had been forming for years. The quiet I had once fought for had finally won, and it was unbearable. After the funeral, people filled this house for a few days. Casseroles on the counter, coats hanging by the door, low voices, polite sympathy, and then they left. The silence that followed was different from the kind I used to create. This one had weight. It didn't feel organized or controlled. It felt permanent. I began noticing small things. The way no one called late at night just to talk. The way my children chose their words carefully when they did visit. The way conversations stayed pleasant, safe, almost rehearsed. It wasn't tension. It was distance. I had taught them that difficult feelings should be handled privately. I had modeled composure so well that vulnerability no longer had a place in this house. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time, I let myself replay moments without correcting them. The look on my daughter's face at 16, the quiet I had once fought for, had finally won, and it was unbearable. After the funeral, people filled this house for a few days. Casseroles on the counter, coats hanging by the door, low voices, polite sympathy, and then they left. The silence that followed was different from the kind I used to create. This one had weight. It didn't feel organized or controlled. It felt permanent. I began noticing small things. The way no one called late at night just to talk. The way my children chose their words carefully when they did visit. The way conversation stayed pleasant, safe, almost rehearsed. It wasn't tension, it was distance. I had taught them that difficult feelings should be handled privately. I had modeled composure so well that vulnerability no longer had a place in this house. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time, I let myself replay moments without correcting them. The look on my daughter's face at 16, the way my husband's shoulders lowered when I redirected his worries into practical advice. The careful tone my son used whenever he disagreed with me. They weren't afraid of me. They were careful with me, and I mistook that for respect. Years ago, when the children were small, there was an evening storm that knocked the power out. The house went dark, and they all gathered in the living room. My husband lit candles. The kids were nervous at first, then excited. We talked, we laughed, we told stories in the dark. It was loud, it was messy, it was alive. I remember thinking just for a second how beautiful it felt. Then the lights came back on, and I went back to keeping things orderly. I thought love meant stability. I thought calm meant safety. I thought if I could prevent arguments, prevent tears, prevent raised voices, I was protecting everyone. But protection without closeness becomes isolation. I didn't see it happening. That's the hardest part. There was no dramatic break, no slammed door, no final argument that marked the end of warmth, just a slow fading. My daughter once told me gently that she sometimes wished we had fought more. I laughed at the time. I took it as a strange compliment. Now I understand what she meant. Fighting means something matters enough to stay in the room for. Silence means stepping away before it can deepen. I stepped away again and again, always politely. At 94, memory becomes sharper in strange ways. I forget where I place my glasses, but I remember the exact expression on my husband's face the night he tried to tell me he felt lost after retirement. He needed me to sit in that uncertainty with him. Instead, I handed him solutions, schedules, practical adjustments. He nodded. He always nodded. We lived decades side by side. But there were rooms inside him I never entered because I preferred tidy hallways over complicated spaces. I can admit that now. There is no one here to disturb. My children are kind to me. They visit when they can. They call on holidays. They make sure I'm cared for. But there is a thin layer between us that was built long ago. It wasn't built in anger. It was built in restraint. Sometimes, late at night, I let myself imagine what it would have been like to stay in those uncomfortable moments. To let my daughter cry without promising we would talk tomorrow. To let my husband sit in frustration without smoothing it away. To allow the house to be loud and imperfect. I don't imagine grand speeches or dramatic changes, just small pauses where I would have chosen presence over control. The quiet in this house now isn't peaceful. It is complete. And it carries my fingerprints. I am 94 years old. I lived carefully. I loved carefully. I kept everything measured. And in doing so, I measured out the warmth without realizing it. If you are listening to this, maybe you hear something familiar, or maybe you don't. I'm not saying this to correct anything. I can't correct anything. I'm simply telling the truth the way it finally feels inside me. Sometimes peace is not the absence of noise. Sometimes it is the courage to let the noise stay. And I learned that when it was already too late. If this story sits with you for a moment, you can stay here with it, or share what it brings up for you. I suppose that's all I wanted tonight. This is a quiet confession from a 94-year-old woman reflecting on family, emotional distance, and the hidden cost of silence in marriage and motherhood. In many American homes, peace can slowly replace connection without anyone noticing. Emotional restraint, unspoken feelings, and misunderstood strength often shape relationships over decades. This story explores aging, regret, loneliness, and the psychology of quiet households in later life. It speaks to adult children, parents, and anyone who has mistaken calm for closeness. Sometimes the absence of conflict is not harmony, but distance. And sometimes understanding arrives only at the end.